Hey there, Mr. Reddit here. Welcome back to another episode of r/entitled Parent Stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. My grandma started nasty rumors about me in school. After that, refused to upgrade my PC to properly do my job? Okay, I'll make you watch me work. And after that, give my hours away to a new hire? I'll get you fired. Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen gets fired. But what will I do? So please smash that like button. And if you're new, subscribe and turn on notifications for new stories from Reddit every single day. My grandma started nasty rumors about me in school. My grandma is an interesting individual. One may place her in the Karen category. She's from a small town where you're either very well off and waspy, or you do drugs and live in an old school made into an apartment building. She's on the waspy side, knows everything and everyone, always will find something about you to nitpick at. Fun times. The best time was 8th grade. She was a math teacher in my school for junior high. Oh boy, was that a dandy time. Because I was her granddaughter, she put a huge target on me. Every day she would watch me like a hawk and wait for the split second that I would look away, then shout, "OP, pay attention. Don't make me tell your mother you're goofing off in my class." And the whole class would giggle. She would grin and her ego would inflate like swimming shorts when you first walk into the water. One time I accidentally wore slippers to school, and for the rest of the year she would bring it up like, "Can you not remember the equation like you couldn't remember your shoes?" Cue malicious grins and laughter. But the straw that broke the camel's back was when I got a boyfriend. Bit of backstory here. I was held back in kindergarten, so I'm a year older than everyone in my 8th grade class. I was dating a guy in 10th grade, but he skipped ahead a grade, so he was actually a year younger than his 10th grade class. This made our age difference to be only about a year apart. However, from an outside perspective, when you first hear about the age difference, I'm sure your first reaction would be like, ew. And boy, did my grandma eat that up like it was her very last meal. Anytime we would visit, she would make side comments like, "We knew OP prefers older men, right OP?" Or, "If it was my kid, I certainly wouldn't approve, but I guess times are a little different." It was annoying, but it wasn't interfering with my life. That is, until she started to gossip about me to other teachers. She would tell them that I was sneaking around with my boyfriend, that I was going into teachers' lounges and bathrooms with him. She also heavily implied my parents were against all of this. For context, my parents knew how old we both were and actually aren't crazy. Also, my boyfriend was the quietest, nerdiest kid in his grade. It took us both 2 weeks of holding hands before we even kissed, so none of this was true. But that didn't stop the rumors. During lunch, I'd get asked by girls if it was true I had done these things. If I was in class and I would ask a teacher to use the restroom, they would refuse. If they did let me go, they would interrogate me for several minutes first to make sure I wasn't sneaking off to do anything with my boyfriend. Before any of this, I was literally a fly on the wall, and I was completely fine with that. Now, I was miserable and felt completely helpless. After coming home crying for who knows how many days in a row, my mom got fed up. I remember her screaming, "That's it!" grabbing her keys and storming out the door. When she returned, she said that grandma wouldn't be bothering me anymore. Once I got older, she told me a brief summary of what had happened. Basically, my mom arrived and approached her calmly, explaining to her that I was her child and she has control of the situation. She even explained the age difference. After asking her politely to back off and stop telling lies to coworkers, my teachers, grandma scoffed and said, "You don't know what she could be doing behind closed doors. I'm just keeping an eye out for her." This set my mom off. She told me that she started yelling at my grandma about the shaming she was doing of her own granddaughter and how miserable I was because of it. She said she has no right to say or do any of this, and what she was doing was cruel and inappropriate. My grandma's response? "How dare you enter my home and accuse me of this? Get out of my house." So my mom left. The next day, my grandma avoided eye contact with me. She didn't even try to call on me for answers or point out what kind of clothes I was wearing. She just averted her gaze and did her job finely. Rumors continued just for a little bit, but then people caught on that it really wasn't as scandalous as the rumors portrayed, and we were left alone. How did all this end? Like you would expect. Grandma acts like it never happened, never brings it up, avoids the conversations if they're around the time when she taught me. It's irritating, but at the same time, it's expected. Now that I'm an adult and we are all aware of her silly ways, we can just smile and nod until we go home, where we then rant about her and how mean she was during dinner. I have so many more Karen-like stories involving her if anyone is interested. Have you ever had someone spreading rumors about you? If so, what did you do about it? Please let us know.
Hey, Mr. Reddit, I heard the person watching this didn't even smash that like button.
Refuse to upgrade my PC to properly do my job? Okay, I'll make you watch me work. I run the parts room at an independently owned auto body and collision repair shop. We'll call the owners Mr. and Mrs. Bossman. We do mostly insurance repairs and always have between 20 to 50 vehicles on property in various states of repair, depending on how busy we are. Once the estimate for a specific vehicle is approved, my job is primarily to order all the parts for the repair, track and receive and organize all the parts for all ongoing repairs as they arrive, input the invoicing and process any returns for wrong/damage/unnecessary parts and such, plus IT work, because I'm apparently the only person there who knows that you can just Google a problem and someone has usually already posted the answer on a message board from 6 years ago. I complain a lot, but in actuality, I very much like my job, and I've become exceedingly good at it over the years. My coworkers are generally pretty great. There's almost no office drama. I don't usually deal with the general public, and the owners are mostly solid bosses, a husband and wife team. Mr. Bossman runs the day-to-day shop, and he is there on site pretty much every day, while Mrs. Bossman comes in periodically to do the books, which she watches like a hawk. Mr. Bossman is a decent guy so far as bosses go, but Mrs. Bossman is great. She's just one of those high personality types who's all peaches and sunshine and rainbows 90% of the time, right up until the moment something doesn't go entirely her way, at which point she drops the smile and becomes the stubbornest, immovable object you've ever butted heads against. May God help you if you actually anger her. She's not a Karen in the slightest, she's just an elemental force of nature, and you can bend like the reed or break like the twig. So I deal with Mr. Bossman on a daily basis and only deal with Mrs. Bossman a few times a week when she needs something for accounting. My default work ethic used to be set to sack of potatoes, but that doesn't fly with the Bossmans, and especially not Mrs. Bossman. I have learned the hard way to be very, very proactive in my duties, which is directly why I'm now a great parts guy. Didn't take long to find out that it's just far easier and safer to be able to redirect the coming storm with knowledge and paper trails than it is to face the fury head-on with laziness and ignorance. She always says, the 3 most important rules to follow in the industry are 1. Cover yourself, 2. Cover yourself, and 3. Cover yourself. To which I'd add a 4th rule. Always send an email beginning with, per our phone call, I'd just like to remind you. Always have an email saved me so many times, becomes relevant later. And she loves me because I have become exceedingly excellent at making her job easier through diligent bookkeeping. As you also might imagine, doing all this ordering and invoicing and emailing and such demands heavy use of a computer. And for years, I had to make do with one that was never built nor intended for the task. It wasn't even very old, just an underpowered tablet-style budget computer originally only meant for the shop foreman to occasionally check estimates. At any given time, I had to run our estimating software plus 2 to 4 price matching programs and their accompanying background scanning programs, plus multiple Chrome windows for email and parts vendors and part finder websites, plus image software to view repair photos or edit diagrams to email back and forth. The budget computer had 2 gigs of RAM and a dual-core 1.3 GHz processor. It could barely handle running Notepad if you had the main estimating software running, and it made my job painfully slow even at the best of times. For 4 years, I'd mention it to Mrs. Bossman, and it was always, oh right, I keep meaning to look into that, and then nothing. But that was better than bringing it up with Mr. Bossman. Mr. Bossman was a former repair technician before they opened their own shop together, so anything on the office end is already good enough until it breaks and is not worth wasting any more money on in his eyes. All his upgrades should be on the production side of the shop, since that's what he knows well. She's much more practical about office upgrades, thankfully. Anytime I'd mention how slow my computer was and how much it was slowing down my work, he'd just laugh it off and say, "It does the job, don't it?" and walk away far too pleased with himself. Mrs. Bossman had been going back and forth with a specific vendor that was arguing against some outstanding credits and unpaid invoices that didn't match our numbers, which means they don't match my numbers. So she came into my office to ask me to look into them as normal. But today is not normal. It's especially busy, and I'm already a day behind where I should be. Cue malicious compliance. This time I decided that unlike normal, my workload was light enough. That I totally had the time right then and there and could look them up for her right on the spot instead of bringing her the files later that day. This seemed urgent after all. So I began searching our database for the problem invoices and very deliberately and thoroughly went through every program I possibly could, opening every estimate and reconciliation and digital footprint to pull up any scrap of even slightly relevant information for her, so that she had all the relevant info to argue with the vendor. Each new screen freezing and pausing and loading anew. Each new refresh taking more of those long form time dilated seconds to complete. Those seconds that drag on and on and on like waiting for a traffic light to turn. I was just being properly diligent. You must understand. Oh, here it is. I'd say in the most matter-of-fact, perfectly normal, everything is fine in standard and typical voice. Yeah, that part was returned back on... Oh, let me pull up the credit memo. Oh, actually, that just shows when I generated the return, but not when the vendor actually took it back. Actually, I remember this one now. The driver didn't leave a return confirmation slip, so I think I sent the vendor a reminder email about this. Let me pull that up. Oh, yes, I told them about this issue 2 months ago. And oh, this is a follow-up email that was part of another chain. Let me forward you both of these. And actually, I think I can still pull up the estimate here since it has the full reconciliation. Uh-oh, I hope it didn't freeze completely. Just wait a sec and it usually catches back up. She kept her smile up, but I could tell it had shifted and she was getting annoyed. Does it always take you this long to look up the invoices? I could tell she was getting really impatient, but she couldn't say anything about it since I was doing exactly what she had asked of me. And she does normally love that I'm this thorough, as long as she's not waiting in real time. Huh? Oh yeah, this is normally like this, I said casually. It's kind of frustrating sometimes, but Mr. Bossman doesn't want to buy another computer since this one does technically do everything I need it to do. Perfectly innocent moon eyes. It doesn't slow me down too much. Not usually. Blink, blink, puppy dog face. I continued doing this for all 5 or so problem invoices, and honestly, it was a 100% typical thing to look up, and really only took maybe 15 minutes total in the end. The only difference was making a big show of it while intentionally making it look like I wasn't making a show of it, but that was enough. Well, I really think we need to look into getting you a new computer. This can't be good for production turnarounds if it's always been this slow. Huge success. Storm of Fury successfully redirected from self to vendor, armed with time-stamped acknowledgments for every rogue charge, and finally knowing the crap I have to sit through each and every time I double-click. With all the invoices and credits properly tracked on our end, vendor's accounting had to admit the mistake had been on their end, and we had been billed in the error. I'm not always right, but even when I'm wrong, I can usually pull up a time-dated email to make it look like I wasn't wrong. Bend a little, and the hurricane may just pass you by for a less prepared target. She waited a few weeks to find a good deal, but sure enough, I had a new computer shortly thereafter that is much more capable of running everything I need to run without derping out on me, and it's been an absolute champion. Decided to write this because it's been almost exactly 2 years working on the new machine that's still going strong, and I just today got an unrequested raise for good performance, so I'm feeling overly pleased with myself. Speaking of computers, do you have a fast computer or a slow one? Please let us know.
My Windows 95 works just fine.
Entitled sister talks crap behind my back, throws a fit when I won't buy her stuff anymore. My sister smokes. Not great to start with. On top of this, she smokes very expensive cigarettes. Each pack is almost $10, which I didn't really care about before when she had a job, because how she spends her paycheck, the parts not being used to care for her kids anyways, isn't really my business. But she quit her job. Yeah, during everything going on right now. A month or so ago, because she, and I quote,
doesn't want to deal with that crappy boss of mine anymore,
and was coasting on the money she had saved. Well, now she's run out of money. Shocker. And instead of looking for another job, she's instead going to try selling her car. But in the meantime, she's broke with no way to buy cigarettes. I don't smoke, so she can't bum anything off of me, but our mom does, so sis could technically bum a couple off of her, but she doesn't because my mom smokes those cheap, crappy ones. No, she wants her brand. She's never heard the term beggars can't be choosers, it seems. So she's been in a crappy mood for a full week because she can't afford her expensive cigarettes, won't accept any cheap ones, and none of us are coughing up $10 to buy her a pack she'll blow through in maybe a week. But today, I'd had enough of her crappy attitude and decided to do her a favor. I said if she would go through the Place A drive-thru for me so I could get us all some food, her kids included, then I'd help her get some gas and a pack of cigarettes. She eagerly agreed, but rejected my offer to get her any food. And Place A wasn't open yet. It was like 9:30 a.m. and they opened after 10, so she'd have to wait till they opened. Then she sort of paused and asked if I really wanted food from Place A and not Place B, which is closer. Place B is legit right next to the gas station, while Place A is maybe 2 buildings down, so still very close. I say no, I've been craving something specific from Place A, so she relents and says okay, and that she's gonna be sitting outside drinking coffee until then. So maybe 20 minutes go by, and I go out to give Sis a written list of what to get, cause she has a not great memory and will forget stuff. And I get close to the side porch door, which is open, and hear her complaining about having to go through the drive-thru for me to our mom. Just how I'm so rude for asking her to drive so far, and how food from Place A is just so gross, and how she didn't even want to do this anyways. Well, I heard our mom tell her to be grateful because nobody else was offering to buy her food, gas, and her fancy cigs. Well, Sis scoffed and started saying something else, but I walked outside and she shut up. Mom and her had wide-eyed looks, but I reached down and plucked my card, which she was gonna use to get everything, from her hand and just said, "Never mind, I don't want to burden you. I'll order through DoorDash instead," then walked back inside. She tried to call me back and say she was just messing around, but I ignored her. And when it was made clear I wasn't buying her crap or coming back, I heard her throwing a huge baby fit and our mom laughing and telling her that she did this to herself by being ungrateful. So yeah, Sis threw her fit and wore herself out before going and sitting in her car for a few hours to pout. I really had no issue helping her if she did a little favor for me in return, but I'm not going to help anyone who complains about said help behind my back. Have you ever tried to help someone and they ended up being completely ungrateful? Please let us know. Office thermostat must be left at 16 Celsius? My boss was brought up in a household where the solution to being cold was putting another jumper on, to the extent the inside of the house used to freeze. Lord knows how many times I've heard that story. Unfortunately, instead of reveling in the marvel that is central heating, my boss feels it necessary to impose the same draconian rules straight from the 18th century on all of us in the office. In a word, it gets cold at work. For context, I work in a converted barn which is both poorly insulated and has a tall vaulted roof. This means any heat dissipates upwards, and the building generally needs a lot of heat to stay comfortable. It's not uncommon to be sat indoors wearing my small down jacket and thermal base layers to keep warm. If I was working outside, I could accept this, but in an office environment, it's unnecessary. To make matters worse, I suffer from Raynaud's, which has been getting worse for the last few years. My condition makes it really rather miserable to sit at work for 8 hours with numb fingers and toes, all because of the lack of proper heating in the middle of winter. I am a long-standing employee, but in all my time working for my company, there's always been another colleague with a far more vocal opinion about how warm the office should be. For the last few years, for instance, a colleague of mine would make a big parade about cranking the heating up to 24 Celsius multiple times a day. This resulted in a daily problem between my colleagues and boss. Typically, my boss would see the thermostat, exclaim it's too hot, and switch the boiler off at the mains. No heat. I tried in vain to convince my colleague to leave the heating at a reasonable level, say 19 or 20 degrees Celsius, as I was certain my boss was unable to actually tell the heating was set higher than his preferred 15 Celsius, unless he could visually see the stat set higher. I was ignored and it continued, and so did the cold. Roll forward a few years. I'm now the only person left in the office other than my boss, his son, and an administrator who works part-time. The temperature has started to drop and the cold has been drawing in. The heating was switched on by Monday this week, and like clockwork, it was set on 15 degrees Celsius. I decided enough was enough and sat down with my boss to discuss the heating. I explained how cold temperatures affect my Raynaud's and asked if he would be willing to increase the thermostat. Surprisingly, my boss was pretty compassionate and promised to increase the heating starting the very next day. True to his word, my boss did increase the thermostat by 1 degree. Apparently, 16 degrees Celsius was his limit. To say I was livid was an understatement, but more disheartening was looking towards another winter shivering at my keyboard. I couldn't stand the thought, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. Two really important bits of information popped into my head that morning that formed the perfect plot in an instant. 1. The thermostat was old school, analog, not digital. 2. My boss and his son were out at a meeting for the whole afternoon and the admin wasn't doing it all. Roll on to lunchtime. I took it upon myself to research the model of thermostat. I found an archived manual online. Page 3, calibration. I couldn't believe how simple it was to adjust the unit. There was one screw to remove the outer casing which exposed the dial. The dial then simply lifts off the spindle and is rotated and reinserted onto the spindle to calibrate the unit. Armed with my Swiss Army knife, once I was alone in the office, I got to work. Disassembling the unit, I rotated the spindle clockwise by 4 degrees, so now when set at 16 Celsius, the thermostat would actually measure 20 Celsius. I replaced the casing, and using a relative humidity meter we use for work, I tested the switching point of the stat. The office measured at 16.2 Celsius and the stat clicked on at around 12. The office measured at 16.2 degrees Celsius and the stat clicked on around 12 Celsius. Hearing the boiler fire in the kitchen gave me the biggest grin I've had in ages. That was on Tuesday. The remainder of the week has been glorious. For the first time in 8 years, the office is actually at a constant, comfortable temperature. I had been waiting to post this in line with the rules as no fallout had occurred. However, this afternoon, my boss asked if I was warm enough. Again, unusually compassionate. While I felt kind of bad to go behind his back, it does give me a scope to increase the heating even more when it starts getting really cold in the next few months. I was also pretty ecstatic as it proved the hunch I have had for years. My boss has had no idea if the heating is set warmer other than the number shown on the stat. So, an all-out win for my bid of malicious compliance. Speaking of thermostats, what do you like to set your thermostat on? Please let us know.
I leave it on 60 all year round. So nice.
Am I the jerk for refusing to let my sister-in-law move into my home temporarily? My husband is deployed and has been gone for almost 11 months. We have a 3-year-old daughter and a 14-month-old son. My sister-in-law, 43, has an 11-year-old daughter who she allows to run amok. Last month, she asked her best friend to move in with her to help her pay bills, and this sparked an affair between her husband and said friend. I feel bad for her, I really do, but there are many reasons why I don't want her to move in. The biggest one, she now calls me to tell me all the time that men are pigs and that my husband is probably cheating on me. Mind you, this is her brother. She doesn't have a job and refuses to get one. She has not worked in 16 years. Her daughter has literally no discipline, and every time they have visited, she's left my home in complete shambles with my kids' toys broken and damaged. Her daughter also lies like a rug, and she just laughs it off and says that it isn't a big deal. Example, her daughter drew all over my spreadsheet for work that was completely finished and due the very next morning. I didn't have time to make another one and had to spend several hours trying to use whiteout. She even wrote her name on it. The kid outright denied it and tried blaming my oldest, who only scribbles. Her mom said,
She said she didn't do it, and I'm not going to break her spirits simply because she drew on something. Put your stuff up for safekeeping next time you invite us for a visit.
I did not invite her. She showed up unannounced. She always says things like,
What are you getting your favorite sister-in-law for her birthday?
Or,
Since you love me so much, you should buy me this.
Anyways, I just can't do it. So she asked last week, or rather told me,
Well, it's final. Greg and I are over. Teresa and I are going to come crash at your place.
Literally, like an outright demand as if I owe her. So I said, No, you're not. She freaked out and asked me why, and I was completely honest with her, down to every last detail. I simply don't have enough patience, and I don't want her in my house while I'm not there to make sure her daughter doesn't destroy my house. My husband called and I told him what happened. He said, You told her no, right? So he's 100% behind me on this. But my brother-in-law is saying that I'm a stupid jerk for not being more understanding because her husband cheated and staying in the house with him and his mistress is going to cause a mental plummet. Am I the jerk? She can't afford to go anywhere else and no one has room to house her. Well, what do you think? Should OP let her sister-in-law move in or not? Please let us know.
I'd put a doghouse in the back for them.
Entitled parent wants free classes when his son messed up. Cast. We've got me, my mom, entitled dad, and entitled kid. Backstory. My mom runs a learning center similar to Kumon, where every week a kid would get a booklet to fill out. However, the parents of these kids are very much grade-driven and also very, very cheap. This leads to a lot of entitled dad and entitled mom encounters. Story. Entitled dad comes in with entitled kid into my mom's office, and I'm sitting there trying to finish some schoolwork. Entitled dad.
Why are entitled kids' grades not improving, huh? We've been coming here for months, and still no improvement.
Mom, coolly. Well, let's sort this out one by one. Mom pulls out entitled kid's file to see what's happening. Mom, while reading the file. So, have you been having any difficulties in school or while completing your assigned booklets? Entitled kid. No. Mom. Well, that is interesting because my file shows that when we access you on each booklet after you have completed it, it shows that you've been getting multiple questions wrong, and many parts of your booklet are not even completed. Entitled dad interjects.
So what? It's your job to make sure entitled kid completes his booklet, not mine.
Mom. Well, when you enrolled entitled kid into this program, you signed a form saying that you and entitled kid would have a responsibility to make sure that you complete the booklet. Entitled dad, ignoring what was just said in order to not take responsibility.
Well, why is he doing so bad, huh? If this is not fixed, I will start dropping entitled kid off at this learning center.
Mom. We are happy to tutor him more, but you will have to pay extra.
Pay? Why should we pay? Like heck we're going to pay.
Mom. Well, you will either have to pay for extra classes, or you will have to get to the bottom of this. However, I did notice that it seems that he's forgetting what he has previously learned, according to his new file. Now, do you still have the previous booklets? Because the form you signed says that entitled kid should review the previous booklets even if he has completed in order to make sure he doesn't forget anything. Entitled kid. Well, I threw them out because I don't need them anymore. Entitled dad realizes he's in the wrong and just leaves with entitled kid without saying anything. Me. What an idiot. Mom. The one thing I don't miss from my days as a computer scientist is not having to deal with the customers. Entitled parents cancel my health insurance out of spite. So when I was a teenager in my first year of college, I was still under my father's insurance, provided through his employer. The plan covered my stepmom, himself, and up to 5 kids at no additional cost. I have confirmed this with my mother, who was on the same insurance until their divorce. My dad and stepmom had both worked for this company for over 10 years. This was not an entry-level insurance plan. During my freshman year of college, which I am still paying for, I suffered a violent snowboarding accident, which left my clavicle in many pieces. The injury required 3 surgeries, the first of which I had to wait around a week. Clavicle still shattered. For the next available surgeon near the small college town. My father lived 45 minutes away. Freshmen were not allowed to have cars on campus, and the hospital was 3 miles away from the school. This town did not have Ubers back in the day, and the average temperature in the town was around 25 degrees Fahrenheit for most of the winter. Feels like 0 degrees once the wind kicks up. I had just recently turned 18, so I had to sign a few forms at the hospital, giving my dad permission to access my medical records. I told him that it wasn't a problem and I would sign them the next time I had an appointment. I knew one friend with a car who would sometimes drive me, or my mother would make the 45-minute drive to bring me to the hospital if my friend could not. My dad calls me one night irate because I had not yet signed the forms. I explained to him that my clavicle was in 7+ pieces, and with the sub-freezing temperatures, walking 6 miles round trip while shivering would be excruciatingly painful. At this point, just getting out of a chair sent pain shooting through my shoulder. My father thought that waiting until I had a ride to the hospital was the utmost sign of disrespect. My friend with the car ended up not being around this week, so I didn't have any transportation to the hospital. My dad calls me, yelling about how I have no respect for what he's doing for me. Filling out paperwork was all he had done. My mother had picked me up from the emergency room and had brought me to both previous doctor's appointments, even with the drive. He threatens to cancel my health insurance if I don't get the form signed before my next appointment. I told my mom he was going to cancel my insurance, and she once again drove me to sign the papers. My father never offered to drive, call me a cab, nor asked how I was feeling. Fast forward 3 months, and I should be recovered from my injury. Unfortunately, the surgeon my father picked, because he was the closest to the university, did not do a good job on the surgery. This led to a bloodborne infection and 2 subsequent surgeries. The infection required me to be hooked up to an IV machine for for 6 hours a day on antibiotics prescribed to MRSA patients. One day, months after the final surgery, while still on daily IV antibiotics, I get an email while I'm in the car with my mother. The email, yes, an email, is from my dad, and although I don't remember the exact wording, it is along the lines of, "Due to your disrespect and attitude when I asked you to sign the insurance papers, we, my father and stepmother, are taking you off of our insurance policy. The changes will take effect at the end of the calendar year." My mother did not have insurance through her work at this time, and I still had 3 follow-up appointments with the second surgeon, which would go into the following year. Neither my mother nor father are wealthy. Both barely cracked $40K salaries while I was a kid, while supporting 3 kids. This insurance through my father's work was a big deal for our family. I was in tears of disbelief over the email. My father could be a cold person, but never had he done something that felt this cold to me. Because I didn't want to walk for 2 hours in the cold with a broken collarbone, you're going to take that as disrespect? Then cancel the free health insurance on your own son? It's more important for you to feel respected than for your son to have health insurance? You sent an email? My own father couldn't even call me to tell me this? I called him and asked if we could talk about it, as I still had doctor's appointments and my antibiotics and the IV machine could cost thousands of dollars a month without insurance, which neither I nor my mother could afford. He said, "You should have thought about that before you gave me attitude about signing those medical papers," but agreed to talk about it and invited me to lunch. I go to meet him for lunch at a little neighborhood sub shop. I sit down across from him and my stepmom, who are already eating their meals in front of me. I sat down and said hello, and they both continued eating in front of me without offering me any food or drink. My dad invited me to lunch and picked the location. Important to note here that while my dad did not come from money, my stepmom had a multi-million-dollar inheritance from her parents and also a significant life insurance payout from her late husband. I asked if there was anything I could do to have them reconsider. I explained the cost of the antibiotics and IV machine without insurance and the doctor's appointments I still had scheduled through the next year. My stepmom then tells me to my face with the most Karen tone ever, "You know what? You should have thought about that before you told your father you wouldn't sign the papers. Frankly, it's just not worth my time to fill out insurance papers for someone this disrespectful." I was dumbfounded. I looked at my father. He said nothing, his look echoing my stepmother's words. I said, "I have no problem filling out paperwork. I'm happy to come over and fill out the paperwork for you guys. You never said anything about it." He responds, "Well, it's a little too late now. I'm with Karen on this one. It's not about the paperwork, it's about the principle of it." I was infuriated at this point. I stormed out saying, "I'm sorry my health isn't worth your time." I haven't had health insurance in 8 or 9 years now. I eat a lot of vegetables and try and stay active. My arm never healed correctly due to the infection, and the bone is 2 inches shorter and will never be fully fused. I no longer talk to my father in any way. I tried to have a conversation with him several years later, and he still stands by the decision of cutting me off his insurance out of spite. I'm doing better now. For a while, I couldn't understand how a person could do that to their child, but now I see my father only wanted kids so he could have the social status of being a family man. He never wanted anything to do with the responsibilities.
Please come watch this video next, you will love it. And join as a channel member today, and we'll give you a special shout out in our next video. And to have us make any kind of video you'd like us to, just come visit us on Fiverr, link pinned in the comments below.